Okay, welcome everyone to this month's Why is a Wednesday. So today we're going to be talking about high-performing hybrid teams. So really looking forward to getting into the debate. I'm James Potton. I believe in a world of entrepreneurial success without burnout. Almost got the t-shirt there. It is a challenge, and it's why it's great to talk with really inspiring people about how they're sort of navigating this landscape. So have worked in high performing teams personally. Hybrid not so much. I have, there's examples of it, but we'll jump into it in the discussion. We have employee number one who I've never met in Amplified at the moment. So we've obviously met lots on Zoom. And Sophie's working out really well. So it's going to be, but I'm also learning on this journey. It's the dream to get this to work because there's a lot in mental health that can really come through from not having that sort of daily commute or reducing it. Our panel might be a bit biased today. I think everyone's looking to see how we can make this work, but the sort of devil's in the detail. So first up, the panellists. We've got Alison Coward from Bracket. So your favourite film is Limitless, which is what you try and help people become. You also have full names to your cats, but I'm not allowed to share any more than that. So you promised me not to.
You're welcome. Me you wouldn't.
I did exactly. So I'm not going to share it. I'm going to keep that quiet. Really good to have you here, Alison. Danny, you're a hybrid consultant and you're ex Oyster HR. Used to make a living playing the blues, busking for dinner pretty regularly. Now you just do it for your energy bills. You paint little model orcs, and you're also in the Air Cadets. And we actually used to work together back along in the design and tech school, and we kind of had a hybrid. I used to be up Tuesday, Wednesdays, and Thursdays, or some acronym like that. So really interested because we've got shared experience of that. John Hopkins, so not the DJ, so not the first time you've probably heard that. You're the founder of Workflex Australia, so calling in from Melbourne. So getting quite late for you. Fun fact that still astonishes your students is that you've never seen a Harry Potter film. Checked on Rotten Tomatoes and it gets 9.75 out of 10, so I reckon it's worth a watch. That'll be an inside joke for anyone, so you won't know that, John. Finally, Kate Murden, founder and CEO of Push. So you recently came back from a festival in Croatia, having done 38,000 steps in one day.
Okay.
Sounds like you should have been sponsored. I'm not sure. I'm not sure I'll be going to that festival in any rush. Really excited to hear from everyone. To set the mood, a bun fight is a fun fight or fun night. So let's kind of jump in. I'll try and leave space for you to all share your views. Try not to swear. It's live, but bad jokes are always welcome. And I always say a bad joke here. So, such as an alternative common word game. So I saw this. So, what is a flatulence? So, an emergency vehicle that picks you up after you're run over by a steamroller. Anyway. Set the tone.
Oh, bad.
So right. Oh no, I'm sorry. So look, let's all jump in. So in less than 1 minute, actually, starting with Alison. So what got you to where you are today? Tell us your journey. So off you go.
Gosh, in 1 minute. Okay, so I have a background in helping creative businesses. Actually, my very first, second-ish career was working in organisations that supported self-employed creatives. Got very interested in how to support them more effectively, did an MA, came out the other end with a business idea. And the reason I came at the other end with a business idea is because I saw that there was an opportunity to encourage creative individuals to collaborate on projects for clients. And that's where I got really interested in teamwork, collaboration. How do you bring, people that are the best at what they do together into essentially high-performing teams? That was, I guess, the initial inception of Bracket was more of an agency, bringing creative freelancers together. By accident, I realised I was really good at workshop facilitation, and organisations started to ask me to do that for them. And through evolution, that's where I just got really fascinated by the dynamics, more by team culture. So essentially what I was doing with freelancers, I started doing inside of organisations. And so now Bracket is a fully fledged team culture consultancy. work with clients across all types of industries, from tech to financial services to a lot of creative agencies, because that's my background. We do a lot of workshops, of course, because that's kind of what my passion is. But we are also very keen on ensuring that people develop the skills themselves in facilitation, and also, how do they continuously evolve and change their culture. So all the aspects around, developing ideas, but also implementing them, and the behaviour change that's necessary to get there.
Awesome, great. Thank you, Alison. So really looking forward to hearing from you on all these points. So Danny, I'll go round. You're up next.
Yeah, so God, I'm very much a generalist. How do you summarize that in a minute or less? Yeah, so I guess I used to be a software engineer. Used to work very much in tech, doing techie stuff, right? And then I ended up doing a lot of teaching people to code, right? And it's funny, in all of that work and all the various other work that I found myself doing over the time, I've always been drawn to like one of two, or the combination of two things, right? Systems, which is like code is systems, right? And I was always fascinated by like architecture and all that kind of stuff about how do you make things repeatable and easy to understand and easy to use and easy to reason about and build mental models about. So there's all the system stuff, and then all the human people stuff, right, which also a lot of engineering should be about more. And that's kind of led me into the teaching thing. And I guess I've found myself, it's funny when you said, Alison, like accidentally facilitating workshops. Like I feel like I've accidentally ended up becoming like a kind of organization opsy, HRE, people opsy type person, and I'm not really quite sure how that happened, but it's brilliant because it combines both those things, systems and people. And I've found myself in the last 4 years probably doing a lot of work with remote companies, specifically around how to design companies to work well remotely. And last year I was working with a company called Oyster that grew from 13 people when I joined to 500 people when I left in a year, and a $1 billion valuation, and it was absolutely mental, because everyone was remote, and in all different time zones all over the world and everything. And I have quite a strong belief that the kind of future of work almost is going to be distributed around the world, and we're going to hire people from all over, and it shouldn't matter where we're at, right? But that means changing how we do work, which is not as easy, as I'm sure we'll talk about for the rest of this thing. So that's kind of like my big thing now, and I'm really glad I've ended up there, because it mostly was a sort of accident. So
no, amazing. Sometimes the best journeys are, hey. So thanks, Danny, and really hey, we're doing different time zones here. So yeah, John, you're calling from Melbourne. So yeah, fire away. Tell us your journey.
Yeah, look, mine was also another accident, if you like. And my background, I'm actually a mechanical engineer by trade. But for the last kind of 15 years or so, I've worked in academia. So my day job, even today, is a university lecturer and associate professor of supply chain management. So I was working on a supply chain project close to 10 years ago now that was looking at how to reduce congestion around cities. So congestion is obviously, it's expensive. So from a business perspective, it causes delays, it's disruptive, it's bad for the environment. And we were working together with local government, looking at a project to reduce congestion around Melbourne. And, the very first, I remember almost the first day or first week of that project, it's like, well, let's kind of dig into this. We're using a kind of design thinking mentality into why do we even have congestion? We have congestion because a lot of people travel to and from work at the same time. Cities aren't congested all the time. So that dawned on us very quickly. And then shortly after that, we kind of realized that these people are traveling to offices. They're taking laptops with them to work. They don't need them anymore. And that really started my real passion for the subject. And as much as I'm very lucky to work with really large organizations, small companies, and lots of governments around the world, looking at hybrid and, well, even before hybrid, so sort of remote work trends. And obviously until about 2 years ago, everyone said, oh no, it's crazy, it's never going to happen, you're mad. And then within 2 years, everybody's kind of doing it. So look, really, really interested in the discussion tonight and talking about hybrid work.
Awesome, great, thanks, John. And yeah, finally, Kate.
Hello, I'm Kate. I'm the founder of Push. I suppose you could say push was a happy accident, but it also came out of a total shitstorm in my life, to be really honest. I worked in advertising for the best part of 20 years, and to cut a very long and boring story short, I ended up being signed off with stress and horribly burnt out. And whilst I knew I could go back into it, it just no longer felt right on many levels, on a kind of values level, on a purpose level, and certainly in terms of how burnt out I was from it and not being able to look after myself. I could see this happening to more and more people around me, and just genuinely wanted to do something about it. And that's how Push was formed. And over the last 8 years, boy, has it evolved. And as you can imagine, over the last couple of years, in particular, when we talk about the fact that actually we want to help people think, feel, do, and manage better, which are our 4 big pillars, boy, has it never been more called into need, as it were. Our whole thing is about how we want to make work better. We've made a commitment that over the next 3 years, we are going to help 3 million people make work better. Why did I sign myself up to that? Yeah, but the commitment there is very much that we help obviously corporates, but then what we also want to do is then go and help communities with our not-for-profit and charity work, and then also Push Futures, which is very much about helping schools and uni leavers getting into the world of work, which, as you can imagine at the moment, feels more important than ever, given everything that's going on with mental health for young people. And the final thing, I suppose, really to say is, how do we do that? How do we make work better? I'm obsessed with helping people think, feel, do, and manage better. And really, the bit that I think is the crucial bit is helping people understand the importance of how they're feeling. And for me, that's about really raising up the agenda, helping people have much greater awareness of how they're feeling and how they can manage that better. But also, and this is a big thing that we're launching, in particular when we think about World Mental Health Day, if we have a critical aim about really improving how people feel, then we have to keep this stuff really simple. And as much as I want my business to be a success, this isn't about massive training programs or apps or any of those things. It's about helping organizations create safe spaces. And we're on a real mission to do that. So helping people understand themselves better, have the tools to look after themselves, but genuinely creating safe spaces in organizations where people can speak up when stuff's coming up. And it's actually pretty simple. So yeah, that's us.
Awesome. Great. Thank you. Okay. Look, so really good to hear, like, yeah, what the passion in the room and like what got you to where you are right now. So so much knowledge to tap into. So like starting off really simple, Danny, what's hybrid working? Take us away.
So you sent me that earlier and I was like, damn, that's harder to answer than it sounds. Right. Because it's really funny that I feel like obviously the pandemic, the evolution of like hybrid working, like, you know how we always used to call it like WFH, right? Work from home. Like that was kind of hybrid work. It was basically being in an office, but like people didn't have to be there all the time, right? And I worked in a few big corporate places like that, and it never really worked that well, because you'd be in meetings with like on that quiet laptop in the corner and you couldn't really hear anyone and everything. And obviously, the thing the pandemic's done is kind of flip that around the other way, right? And I feel like hybrid working done well now is probably much more remote first in its nature. But I guess the reason I'm like, that's quite a hard question to answer is that I think we're all still working out how to do hybrid working well. Like, I don't think anyone, and like I talk with lots of like people who like kind of have been doing big remote first organizations for a long time, kind of have offices and stuff. No one really, it's a bit like global compensation. It's one of those things people just haven't quite worked out how to do yet, right? And I think that's really, really interesting. And so I guess for me, hybrid working done well probably looks like remote working, like remote first, asynchronous working, these kinds of things. But like people can go to a place if they want to. And, and I think that's what it looks like. But it's kind of weird because there's loads of stuff like certain workshops and all of this that are much better done in person, right? And I still feel like, what is hybrid working like? I feel like we're kind of working that out, because it definitely isn't, in my opinion, being like, hey, you got to be in the office like 4 days a week and you can have 1 day at home, and so
which is what it's being molded to, depending on who's leading which company. So
depending on your agenda is exactly
yeah.
You know, but I think it's interesting. I'd love to know what everybody else thinks. Like, you know,
jump in. Has anyone got?
Right?
Alison.
Yeah, I actually, as everyone was doing their introductions, I had a bit of a light bulb moment because I mentioned that I, used to work in the creative industries, and the initial inception of Bracket was about bringing teams of freelancers together into teams to run projects for clients. I did my MA 15 years ago in 2007, and Bracket was essentially about running remote teams, distributed teams. So hybrid working isn't actually anything that new. Like we've got a label on it now, but it's actually been in the pipeline for a very, very long. I mean, even before 2007, all the reading that I was doing around the creative industries and how freelancers worked, we're kind of starting to see that come into play now. I would say, and I'll probably talk about this a lot more throughout the session, for me, hybrid work is work. Like we've got a label on it now because we're going through this transition and we kind of need to call it something. In the future, I hope that we have evolved to be able to have conversations about work, whether people are working in an office together, whether they're working from home, whether they're doing a mixture of the two, whether they're working for anywhere. And I think we kind of, I'm a big advocate of hybrid working because it advocates for flexibility. And people being able to do the work in the way that works best for them. And therefore, that's how you build a high performing team. But essentially, the crux of it is, this is work. This ain't going away. This is work. This is evolving. It's all, as Danny said, we're still figuring it out. I feel like we're going to be figuring it out forever because work is changing forever. We're never going to be at an end point where it's like, yeah, tick, hybrid work sorted.
Awesome. Yeah. Okay, great. Kate, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a number of things here, isn't there? I think the thing around hybrid working, and you just put it so right, Alison. Like the point is that let's stop naming it that. It's just the future of work, or it's just how we should be working now. But it's, I think if we can continue to think about it as a business challenge, we're approaching it the wrong way. Actually, it's a people solution, and the point is that we've gone through the biggest transformation program that any company will ever go through, the biggest change any company will ever go through. And not only that, we've had humans go through one of the most seismic things they will ever go through, and we're basically asked them to go through a transformation program without taking care of or any consideration of what they've been through, right? So actually you're asking, if you have an F1 car that suddenly has to go on really difficult terrain, you're going to pull it out and you're going to prepare it and make sure that it's ready for it, and we haven't done any of that. So the point is, to that point around flexibility is absolutely at the heart of this. But actually, in order to be able to work that way, not only do we have to be cognizant of what we've actually been through, but we have to set people up to be able to deal with what's coming up. And that for me is about trust. It's about connection. It's about relationship building. It's about growth mindset. All of these new skills, mindsets, and behaviors that people just don't have at the moment, right? And we have to consider not being a structural thing, a technology thing, a framework thing. Of course, those things have to happen, those policies have to happen, etc., etc. But we have to come back to the point that at the moment, we know that people are massively disengaged. People have gone from, we've done some research recently where we've seen that people have put work as their number one priority from 50% down to 28%, putting self-care ahead of it. And rightly so, because they're bloody burnt out, right? And they're disengaged with the places that they've been working with. So if we want to shift that, then we need to really think about how we can reconnect with those people, and putting them first is absolutely at the heart of it, because otherwise we're just going to keep burning people out. If you don't want people to check out and ultimately burn out, then you have to re-engage with them. And that for me is genuinely putting people at the heart of it and doing it quickly, because otherwise people are going to really vote with their feet.
Yeah. No, brilliant. Okay, thank you. And yeah, John, did you have any sort of thoughts on this?
Yeah. Look, I have to agree with all the other panel members. Completely agree with everything they've just said, and in particular what Alison said about this is a label. This isn't something new. So workplace flexibility, it is historically around giving employees more flexibility over time and place. So where they do their work and when. So this hybrid has really come from that. It's a type of workplace flexibility around place. You can work from the office, the traditional workplace, or you can work from home, or you can work from some other remote location. And that's kind of where this has all come from. But what I've found really interesting, in our research, is that most organizations didn't design their current hybrid work model. It just happened. So what kind of happened was, prior to the pandemic, everybody came to the office every day. That was it. That was the norm. Nobody challenged the status quo. Nobody questioned it. In terms of workplace flexibility that was available then was very minimal. It did exist, but very few people even knew that they could have access to it. So what's kind of happened is then the pandemic comes along. People can't go to work because of pandemic restrictions, and they have to isolate and stay at home. And thankfully, the pandemic did happen in 2020 and not 1999, because then they wouldn't have been able to continue to work from home. They wouldn't have had the technology and tools to enable them to do that. But they did, and they went home and they were able to continue work without any experience of working from home in the past, without the right equipment and without the right setup. So, as Kate alluded to, it was a very difficult situation to be in. But beside that, people managed to get through, and even beyond that, productivity not only stayed as good as it was, but in many cases even increased. And then what happened was, as the restrictions started to lift, at different times in different countries around the world, people started to drift back in. As confidence went up, but not only confidence in not catching COVID, but confidence in being able to kind of go out. But even then, confidence worked the other way as down. People like saying, well, hang on a minute, I've been working from home for 2 years. I can work from home. I can work like this again in the future and continue to work like this and continue to have flexibility. I like what I've just tasted over the last 2 years, and I want it to continue. And that's kind of where we're at the moment. And these models of hybrid work are definitely starting to emerge. And that's definitely my key focus for my current research. But nobody has cracked that yet. And there's no perfect solution. No. And again, I think it was Alison that said, it's forever evolving and always will be. And I know, for instance, today that Tim Cook announced that their hybrid model is going to be everybody in on a Tuesday and a Thursday and one other day. That's decided by their team. And that's a pilot. So if Apple are only doing their pilot, and they're ahead of the curve, when it comes to almost any organization in the world, that shows you the immaturity of the current hybrid work models.
Yeah. But don't you think, and that's okay, isn't it? Like, we should be approaching this as an experiment. And by the way, it wasn't okay before. Do you know what I mean? Like, actually, we know from, as I'm sure you guys will know as well, people were so done with how we were working before, and the stress levels were insane. So even if we get something that's about 70 or 80% right, we're a lot better than we were previously, by the way.
Yeah, I think one of the things with the hybrid working thing that makes it kind of hard, and like it, I don't know, like when the pandemic happened and everyone kind of went remote, right? Like for some companies, a lot of the companies I work with, that was like a forcing function to be like, shit, we need to like sort out stuff, right? And be intentional about how we design. I think you said like the previous hybrid working job wasn't designed. That was like a big push for people to be like, we should design how we do stuff more. And one of those things was remote working. But I feel like it with the hybrid thing, it kind of has this weird conflict between like the thing that was before, which is being in an office, and then this new design thing where there's all this flexibility. And I think in any reasonable sized organization, that can lead to this like weird tension and make it difficult to work out how to do hybrid. I almost think that's like an added challenge to hybrid over and above all the challenges that come with being fully remote, right? Because there's kind of this historical stuff associated with what an office is and how offices work and all that kind of thing. So yeah.
There's this difficulty, and I want to try and push it in now to like more about like the leaders or leadership's challenge. And there's some common objections around, junior team members not having like experience, like the team culture. Learning and development is like can be trickier. How do you effectively manage your team, and that sort of onboarding, and sort of protecting company culture. So maybe to Kate, like to begin with, why is it so hard? Why are leaders finding this so hard?
Why are leaders finding it so hard? Well, I mean, let's talk about middle managers as well as leaders, right? Because I think personally that I personally think the middle managers really hold the key to this, because from my opinion, I think that if we think about one of the greatest challenges that is represented by hybrid working, what we're talking about is on a human level, the challenge between trust and connection. And I think actually what that comes down to as humans is that we just have to become a lot more conscious, right? And actually to really, really develop our human skills in terms of how we connect with people. I think the problem that we're facing when it comes to middle managers, who if we think about actually one of the greatest outcomes or problematic outcomes that has come from working in a hybrid is that people are ultimately very disengaged. And the way to overcome that is that we really need to improve those engagement levels, and that's going to come from that connection, which I believe on a macro scale within an organization is going to come from middle managers. So we need to look at how we can help people improve that connectedness. And at the moment, it's just not really happening, is it? You can see that trust is a massive issue within organizations. I think managers really, sorry, that's my dog, I'm so sorry. We've gone from a place that managers have gone from being product managers into people leaders. And at their very best, I'm so sorry, 2 seconds.
Yeah.
At their very best,
whether we should stop or no, we'll wait.
At their very best, they had very little training. But then if you think on top of that, a lot of people now have been promoted into manager roles, but they actually haven't had because in order to try and keep them. But again, they haven't got any, they haven't had any training within that. And then the other side of it as well is that actually people are coming to them. We're seeing now that 90% of all managers are having to face increasingly complex challenges that are coming to them from their team, because their team are going through more than they've ever done previously. And we talk about this so much, and there is no talking therapist in the world that doesn't have a supervisor. And actually, some of the stuff that's being placed on those managers' shoulders as a people leader is wild, right? That they're having to deal with, and they've just had no training in it. So that disconnection is becoming more and more. On the other side of it, people actually don't necessarily trust the team that they're working with. So that is fueling that lack of connection as well. So for me, I think that as a people problem is one of the things that's really affecting culture at the moment.
Yeah. So
I believe it's the most obvious way of quickly reconnecting people and improving their engagement with the organization.
Yeah. Okay. Amazing. And that trust resonates so much at that point. Does anyone else want to jump in with thoughts on what Kate just said? Or yeah, John, go for it.
Yeah. Look, I think Kate really nailed it there. I think that kind of team leader, middle manager, supervisor level has always been the key role in accessing workplace flexibility. I know, some of the research I've been involved in long before the pandemic, when you look at particularly large organizations, you might have a look at policies they might have for flexible working. The policies look fantastic, but when you kind of dig a little bit deeper at that middle manager level, they don't know anything about the policy. And then you look at the employees, they don't know anything about the policy or the fact that they're allowed to, by law, it's actually even in the Australian Fair Work Act, that you can request flexible work arrangements based on certain criteria. There was a lack of awareness amongst the supervisors. Even within certain organizations, you might get two identical requests to two different managers and two different answers, just based on their knowledge and their own personalities. But what I also think as well is, and why it's so important that managers are kind of really involved in this conversation and their roles change and evolve over time, is that throughout COVID, not only did they had to continue their own job and their own role under very difficult circumstances, they've all of a sudden become a counselor and a coach, and all they've inherited all these other roles that they never had before, because they're looking after the well-being and the happiness of their staff in a difficult period. So yeah, I think when it comes to anything to culture and wellness, they play a key role in this whole picture.
Yeah, thanks, John. And you recently just shared a posting the last day that Eric Schmidt saying ex-CEO of Google, saying he didn't know how we build great managers. Like that was the thing that he focused on, wasn't it? It was almost the management. How do you do that remotely was the crux of that. So yeah, Danny, Alison, have you got any thoughts?
Go for it, Alison.
Yeah, I think I want to add to that because I completely agree, absolutely 100% agree with everything that's been said about managers and middle managers. I think, Danny had said before that this isn't like a shift from one thing to another. We're adding an extra layer on. So it's not just that we've gone from working in the office to working remote. We're kind of mixing all of those things up. So with that extra layer, we need a new set of skills and a new approach. And I mean, even before the pandemic, one of the things that I was noticing was that our need to work together and collaborate well was increasing, yet our skills to do that ability effectively hadn't quite caught up. And I think people had almost got a false sense of security in all of the technology that's been created to help us collaborate and communicate, forgetting that they are tools, like they're great tools, they're tools, but it's people that collaborate and communicate, not the tools. We have to know how to use them effectively. So some of the skills that I'm seeing, as well as all the things that Kate and John have mentioned around, reaching out, being able to kind of, see the signals of teams being in trouble and being able to have those conversations. For leaders, I'm seeing that we also need to develop those skills within team members as well, because it can't just be on the shoulders of the leaders. This is changing so fast. And as a whole population of workers, we need to take responsibility for learning how to connect and collaborate and work with each other more effectively. That takes, Kate has already mentioned a growth mindset. It takes an experimental approach, like understanding that the way that we work needs to continuously improve, and we need to have like Apple, the pilot approach. We are trying things out. We are coming back and we're reviewing, we're looking at our habits, we understand behaviour change. And a big kind of core of this for me, because of my background and because of what I do, is the role of facilitation, the ability to facilitate and have good conversations about how we work together. And I think, if we were to take that skill out and just do that, sit down and talk about how we work together and not just expect it to happen because we're working, we're sitting next to each other, or we've got the tools, we've got Slack, and Slack should do it for us. It's actually, we need to really sit down and think, what are the skills that we need for this new era of work, and take the approach for all levels to kind of learn it. There's definitely a need for much more self-awareness. Leaders need to know when someone's in trouble or when someone needs help, but similarly, workers need to know, well, how do I work best? When am I most productive? When am I most creative? What triggers me? What do I find challenging? When do I need to reach out to my team members? When do I need to collaborate? When do I need to be working alone? And again, we're not cultivating those conversations.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you, Alison. And Danny, like, what do you see done well by Oyster, for example? Because you've seen it. It's like meta, right? You're trying to do it, and we're doing it.
Yeah, exactly. So it's really interesting. Obviously, for context, Oyster's distributed company and fully remote, right? So not a hybrid organization, and we'll never likely have any offices or anything, right? So but I think that all of that stuff that everyone's just talked about, right? Like connection, managers knowing how to do that, look after people, accidentally becoming counselors, that was super, super important. But I often find myself saying, like, some of the people I work with, I end up being like, I always feel like good remote working is really just good working, in that, like, all the stuff that, when the pandemic hit and I was working with remote companies at the time, or companies shifting to it, there were some firms that just when the pandemic hit, everything was fine, right? Because they had solid teams, they had good managers who were skilled at managing and understanding and building teams and connections and relationships and all this stuff. They sort of had that stuff, and they had all of the technical tools and whatever in place. And they were intentional about how they used them and how they designed how they work, right? And the pandemic just didn't really hit them that much. Everyone just went home, and it was kind of fine. That's simplification there, but whereas other companies, it absolutely didn't. And it's funny, like at Oyster, we spent a lot of time worrying basically about how to build connections. You've got people in time zones where they potentially can never talk. How do you do that? And we had just a load of intentional practices that were a lot of them were very simple. Like we'd always start meetings with certain check-ins that were designed in a specific way to like bring people together a little bit more. And, you know, tiny little thing, but added up at every meeting, that became an organizational habit, which then bled into the culture. You know, we even like you mentioned Slack earlier on, Alison, like sure, you're right, Slack's just a tool, but you can choose to use Slack in about 1,000 different ways, right? And you can build, you know, I'm not saying you can build really genuine, amazing connections on Slack, but you can kind of build some reasonable connections with teams and people by using Slack well, right? But that you have to be intentional about making that happen, which means having some rules. And it also means having people who go role model those behaviors, right? And go out there and are on there doing the right things on Slack, or reacting or posting in shout outs channels or whatever to kind of get that thing going. And you know, there's like millions of other little things. Like we used to do social calls a lot at Oyster, where we just normalized jumping on Zoom and chatting with someone just for like, and deliberately not talking about work. And we sort of gave some guidance to people who were maybe new to remote working and were like, that feels really weird. We gave them like literally a list of like weird stuff to talk about when you're socially weird on Zoom, right? And like, and it worked. People started talking to each other, right, across the company, and you kind of started to get those water cooler moments that you know, that people were forever talking about as not happening in remote work. And like, and you know, we also gave a lot of guidance on well-being and that kind of stuff, right? And that was a really important thing for managers, particularly loneliness, especially during the pandemic, right? But it's a huge thing. And I think you said about, I know we're going to talk about like more junior employees. Like, I think that's a huge thing, right? It's easy for me in this nice house I live in and stuff to be like not lonely. But if you're sat in like a basement flat somewhere with like a view of a wall out your window, hunched up on your bed with a laptop on your knees, like remote working can get pretty lonely, right? So and that's a whole nother thing. Look,
I mean, it's such an important point. I'd like to explore it. When you were talking about that remote bit, like Kate, it reminded me you were talking about the extra effort you have to put in for long distance relationship, right? Is that like
I mean, not my own, but I mean, I think what that immediately made me think about, and I think everyone's just made some unbelievably good points there. You know, I think the first thing is when it comes to managers, you know, or indeed anyone, when you're thinking about how you genuinely make remote working work, or sort of not even remote working, hybrid working work. The point is, it's almost like thinking about it as though, you know, as a human, if you want to work better, you might have to adopt new behaviors in order to be able to do that. And when you initially do it, it might feel really bloody uncomfortable. But as soon as you put in these new routines, what might feel uncomfortable at first suddenly becomes second nature. And all of a sudden, those actions that you're having are consequently making you feeling and then thinking better, right? So it's going the other way around the cognitive triangle rather than think, feel, do. So I think that's incredibly important. So thinking about it on a human level, but then also within an organization, what soon will become your norm. But, you know, and again, and I'm really pleased that Alison said about this. Listen, I genuinely think that middle managers on that kind of macro level within an organization have a huge responsibility. I'm also super conscious that they've got a lot of other stuff going on. So how do we make things second nature? But also we must never get to this place of parent-child. We have to stay totally adult within our interactions. And a huge part of this when we deal with organizations is we come back to the place of what's in it for me, helping people understand what their responsibility and their accountability is when it comes to them as a junior employee right through to a leader, you know. And so we're doing a big piece of work with a client at the moment where, you know, whether we consider it as well-being, whether we consider it as mental health, whatever we say, what is the reason why we want to help this organization perform at its best from an organizational point of view and on an individual point of view. So what impact is it going to make to me as an individual, for my team, for my organization, and then society at large, right? And if we do that, then we help people understand why they are doing something, because when they're first doing it, it's probably going to be a bit more challenging, right? And so it's going to take a little bit more energy to do that. So I think that that's a really crucial part of always, whatever it is that, whatever the behavior change that we're looking for someone to make, given it probably will take a little bit more energy than just staying the same, why are we doing it and why are we committing to that? And ultimately the end benefit to everyone.
Yeah, amazing.
On that why thing, one of the things we did at Oyster, like, religiously, was we documented stuff, like everything, like how we work, when basically whenever anything was needing to be like a habit, we were very intentional about how we designed it, and we wrote it down. But that writing always included, and why are we doing it like this, right? Because otherwise it just, you said about that parent-child thing, people just ended up being like, well, these are the rules and I have to follow the rules, right? Which is not useful in any context, really, right? You know, so like, yeah, totally agree with
you. You have to move it from extrinsic motivation into intrinsic, right?
Yeah,
and
exactly,
you know,
right.
there's quite big shifts along that, but you know, we're never going to quite get there unless people genuinely understand what's in it for them. You can market this stuff as much as you want and communicate it, but until they see what they'll get out of it, it's never going to work.
It sort of feels like we're talking a lot of, I mean, beliefs, you know, change behaviours, right? So we're talking about beliefs and in this a lot. I don't know, John, where were you interested in jumping in? And
yeah, look, just one point I wanted to make is, obviously tonight, or today for you guys, tonight for me, we're talking, and as far as long distance relationships goes, I think this first date for me is going okay with you folks.
But who are you most interested in? Let's, you know.
But obviously we're talking about hybrid work. So, you know, the fact that we're saying hybrid work, and we kind of defined what it was before, there's some level of expectation that people will spend some time in the office. So, and I think that maybe the things that we're talking about, you know, the culture building, the you know, nurturing young talent, things like that, maybe they're the things that we focus on when we do come together. So I know in terms of, you know, the interviews that I kind of conducted last year, interviewed lots of kind of senior leaders around Australia to ask them some of the questions we've been asking tonight, you know, in terms of what does hybrid mean to you? How are you going to manage it? What kind of models are you going to have? And look, I would say for me that the number one word for 2021 was purpose. They kept saying purpose, kept coming up in every single interview. Said you can't bring people in to sit in Zoom meetings all day. You can't bring people in, force them to come in, to get their business suit on and come in and sit in traffic or in the commute and sit in front of a computer all day working on spreadsheets. They need to have a purpose. So they're saying that, you know, coming to the office needs to be a magnet and not a mandate. There needs to be something there that they see value in, a purpose for them to come in. And and look, in terms of companies I've worked with, when I asked them that question and what things they think work well when we come together, tend to be things like planning days and collaboration, training, informing events, and social events. And, you know, that's very important in terms of the you know, nurturing that right kind of culture. And yeah, look, and maybe, you know, if everybody comes in on a Monday or a Tuesday, whatever day it might be, maybe some combination of those types of events is a magnet to draw people into the office, and it is something that they want to come to. It's not something like, oh my God, I got to go in tomorrow just because it's a Tuesday and I have to go in on a Tuesday. There's a purpose for them to actually be there.
Yeah, we have a framework that we use at Bracket, and we found a lot of success in it actually. And where it starts with is alignment, and it is alignment around, you know, how we're going to work. But we have to start with what's the work that we need to get done as a team? Like, what is it that we actually need to come together? What does success look like for us as a team? And therefore, how do we need to work in order to reach that? So our pillars, our framework goes from alignment. So it's like, you know, what's the purpose of what we do and how do we need to be as a team to reach that level of success? Who is on the team? So zooming right into the individuals. Okay, so this is the expertise that we have in the team, and these are the ways that we all work. Let's understand a little bit more about each other so that then we can start to think about how we communicate more effectively. Like, how does that person like to receive feedback? When is that person most productive? When is that person best for, you know, to tap for a meeting or a bit of knowledge? Then moving into this kind of design. So again, having the skills to think, okay, let's create the way that we work. Let's work by design, not by default. Let's not just fall into this, but let's actually be intentional about the work that we need to do, where we're trying to get to, and therefore what we need to do. But, you know, how we use Slack, how do we start off our meetings? When do we need to come together? What do those meetings actually look like? What are the different types of meetings that we need to run? And then going into, okay, so what habits do we need to change in order to make those things work? Because all teams have got habits, whether they're productive, whether they're unproductive. And again, having the conversations around what those habits are. Are these habits getting us to where we want to get to? Are they helping us to work in the most effective way that we need to? Is it making the best of everyone on the team? So again, those conversations and understanding the nature of behaviour. Like, behaviour change is hard, it takes energy. So going back to what Kate said, well, what is in it for me to make this change? And how do we actually make this change easy and simple so that we start to build momentum? What are the kind of quick wins, first of all, so that we keep these conversations going?
Amazing, thank you. Yeah, so and we're talking about developing the sort of effective working culture. Hey, it's like there's the intentional element of it, and it not just sort of happening by chance. Yeah, does anyone else want to jump in around this? And
I think one of the things that I've noticed with folks I work with that's often hard is literally all that stuff you just said, Alison, right? Because a lot of it's like, oh, wow, we've kind of never thought about it like this before, right? We've just accidentally done stuff, right? And it especially when you're, it's very easy to sit down and be like, hey, let's talk about how we're going to use Slack or how we're going to do meetings or whatever, right? Those are not hard problems, right? They can be, but usually they're hard because of you haven't done that bit before, right? With the purpose and but that stuff's hard when you sit down with someone and you're like, actually, yeah, we do need to sit down and talk about like why. Why do we exist? Why do we all work here? Why do we have a team this size? Why do we those are questions people are like, well, I don't really know. It just sort of, I can probably look back at some meeting notes and see some really weird independent decisions that led to all this, but it just kind of is how we are. And I think shifting a mindset to especially for leaders of companies to being like, how do we, let's be intentional, but it can be difficult because it feels hard, especially for smaller companies where the leaders of those companies are busy running the company and bits are falling off all over the place and it's already chaotic. Sitting down and being like, hey, now let's spend some time together, working on these very difficult problems potentially, because it'll pay off in a minute. I don't know, Alison, if that's what I found when I do that kind of stuff, that it's just tough because it's big work for people,
The muscle. It's a muscle that you have to start working and
once
building.
you do that, it then gets easier and easier to think about big, difficult problems because you're training yourself.
It's ironic, isn't it? Because it's actually the thing that's most important, and yet we're always all so focused on our product or our service, and so rarely on the business and the people that we work with. And it's like, actually, this is probably the most important thing that we can be doing. But because we've never done it before in most instances, unless you are a coach, you've probably never challenged yourself in this way. And it feels really hard. So you're just like, well, we'll just push it over here rather than actually approaching it in any way. I think, so in that instance, if you think about it, it's how do I reframe this to be something that I do actually want to approach rather than come away from? And I think there's something in that curiosity, isn't there? And I think also, I love that whole thing that you're saying about the word that summarized it. For me, I think that actually when it comes to those kind of stuff, and a word that I'm absolutely obsessed with this year is joy. I just want more joy. Sorry, I swore, didn't I? I want
Who doesn't, right? Yeah.
Actually, the last couple of years have been really hard. And I think everyone else feels a bit like that. So if we change this to joy, how do we get more joy? How do we make work better? Then it feels quite different. And I think the way that we make work better is something around that individualization, something around that flexibility, and putting that at the heart of it. That giving people the chance to really think about what's important to them. And you nailed that. The point being is that we've never really put a focus on how we want to work, and more importantly, we've never really focused on the relationships that we have at work. Going back to that long distance relationship, we've just taken it all for granted, and now I think organizations are breaking because relationships are breaking, and we really need to refocus our efforts on that. Thinking about ourselves as individuals, what we want work to look like, but also, the relationships that are going to sit at the heart of it and make it thrive.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you, Kate. So in amongst this discussion, we're talking also about, the sort of high performance piece. I wondered whether, John, have you got any thoughts on what are the measurements, or what should we be measuring here? What is high performance?
Yeah, look, I think performance has not necessarily changed that much in terms of what an organization's focus must be. So in terms of, no matter what company you're in, you're probably interested in sales and profit and quality and good customer satisfaction. So that's not going to change. So in terms of whether you're a business selling cans of Coke, or you're a business selling whatever it might be, the nature of the business and probably your vision and your mission probably haven't changed that much. But the way that you achieve those outputs has changed. So it's an operational change. It's the way that you manage your people to attain those outputs. Now what I would say is, if everybody had gone home during the pandemic and performance had fell off the end of a cliff, we wouldn't even be having this conversation. We're having this conversation because the power has shifted towards the people. So it's a case of, well, we went home for 2 years and productivity went up. Why do we have to come back in the office anymore? There's hard evidence there, and experience that, we don't have to come into an office to be able to perform at these levels. So that's kind of where this probably situation and debate starts. But I would say, in terms of, again, I remember someone before said, like, to keep things simple. I certainly one of those people who loves to keep things as simple as possible. Things can get very complicated very, very quickly. So I tend to think that, focusing on a theme that's really run through this whole conversation tonight is, and what Kate said, enjoy, but even a case of, well-being, and I would extend that to happiness. Having happy people. If you want to perform well, you want to be able to have staff that, how do you make them happy? How do you make this an environment to work in? How do you give people what they want? I was involved in a research project with Deloitte earlier this year, and someone else on the panel mentioned about how important well-being and flexibility is. And we found in this project with Deloitte that people now value that above a pay rise. So they really value this. I mean, we talk about the Great Resignation, and one of the big reasons behind that, and I don't know if it's so much like in the UK, but in Australia, there's a huge talent shortage at the moment. Recruitment is really difficult, and you have to offer flexibility, otherwise you don't even get any talent. So there's an expectation there already. So I would say, in terms of how you get that, it's really about looking after your people, making sure that they kind of know what their role is, why they're doing what they're doing, what role they play in the wider organization. What does their, what the work that they do, how does that contribute to the wider department and organization. But in terms of monitoring that, so in terms of data, like anything else, things like staff turnover is a big one. If you've got big staff turnover, that's a problem. So people tend to be much more likely to kind of walk now than they probably ever were before. So to retain staff, you need to offer them one of the biggest incentives you can give is this flexibility. So to give them some level of flexibility and control and over where and when, like I mentioned before, they do their job. Because then if they do that, you're giving them probably one of the greatest gifts you can give them is more time. So if they have more time, they have a better work-life balance. They can use that time to, take the kids to school, go to the gym, do yoga, do the things that they like, that makes their life better, and they can still get the job done. So I would say that would be my take on that.
Great, thanks, John. Does anyone want to sort of add any thoughts?
One of the principles that I find myself talking about all the time is this idea of measuring whatever, like outputs, right? Which sounds really weird. Obviously, like leaders of businesses have always done that, right? That's how you know what's happening, right? But like talking about line managers, right? And more junior managers, I think that I've seen lots of teams where everyone just comes to work and does work, right? And actually, they don't necessarily have any good metrics for measuring how well their team is doing their thing, right? And so working out what that is, so they measure that team by like, are they at work? Are they online for this time or whatever, right? And measuring output over time or whatever, right, is really, really important to make this stuff work for all the reasons John just said, right? But I've definitely had to end up sitting down and being like, well, how do we measure the output of this small, like low-level team or business unit, right? What actually is that? And that can be a really challenging thing, right? Putting metrics on stuff, But I think the other things, like, to the question, how do you make high performing teams? Like, obviously, like trust is it basically, in my opinion, that's it, right? Like, but that's like one of those weird, it's like that drawing an owl. You draw circles and then finish the owl, right? Like trust is like the finished owl, and it's very difficult to work out how to actually do that. Sometimes it happens good, right? And there's a lot of things involved. But one of the things I think gets talked about less than it should, particularly in a remote context, is clarity, right? Like I've seen lots of organizations do a lot of stuff around relationship building and all of this, which builds trust, like individual interpersonal trust between various different folks and teams. And that works really well. And it all gets smashed down through lack of clarity in certain things. That might be lack of clarity on how we do this thing. Who is it that does whatever, everything, right? And particularly in a remote setting where you can't just nip over there and ask someone the answer to that thing to get clarity, it can really, really erode trust. Like lack of clarity is probably the number one thing I've seen eroding trust in distributed or remote teams, right? And it's the sort of thing that shouldn't, and a lot of the times it's a lack of clarity about really stuff that should be really easy to answer, or is really easy. It's just that the clarity isn't there, and so there's confusion and all the rest of it. And I don't know, I'd love to other people's thoughts on that, but I feel like we should be talking about creating clarity in organizations more than we are in a general sense.
Yeah.
Around communication, communication obviously at the heart of that, isn't there? It's so interesting, isn't it? Because it's kind of like, what is the modern measurement of an organization working well? Because exactly as you said, it used to, if you think about how companies were measured, there was timesheets, right? And actually timesheets now are absolutely prohibitive when it comes to things like performance and well-being. So you have to, there was something around time. Then there's obviously something around productivity, but the point about productivity is that it can then so much come, for how long does that keep going, versus at the expense, say, of people's well-being or indeed their connection and their engagement, because I think at the moment, I do believe, obviously, as we saw when we first went into the lockdown, productivity increased. But let's remember, we were absolutely all really fearful of what might happen. So everyone was gunning for it. And then off the back of that, we're all now quite burnt out. And actually what we've seen from some of the work that we've done is that CEOs are turning around and saying that actually they feel like their organization isn't as productive. Maybe there's something around innovation as well, because I think that that's probably, if that is genuinely going to lead us out, of this looming recession that we're potentially all facing, are people as innovative as they used to be? How can they be when they haven't had anywhere near as much stimulus or indeed as much connection? And if that's something that we're all going to be focusing on, if it's not there, then those measurements have gone down. There are so many different things, and it's like, what is that modern measurement now? And more to the point, what happens if they are at the detriment of each of other things?
Yeah. I think I would like to see all teams and organizations measuring a little bit more about how they're working together. It sort of goes back to the Google Aristotle research, where they identified like psychological safety being like the key thing, sort of how those teams work together. They thought it was going to be who was on the team and where they went to school, or those kinds of things. And it was actually really about, how they work together, whether there was clarity on goals and tasks, whether they could depend on each other. So I feel like if we start measuring that, as well as the quality of the work, how people are feeling, but how people are working together, it kind of will put a bit more of a lens on having those conversations, and also giving people, back to what Danny was saying, giving people the permission to talk about how they work together. I have this phrase that I say, how you work together has more of an impact on the success of a team than what you're working on, and even who you're working with. So, you can have a great idea, terrible team, like, conflict in the team, you're not going to get there. You can have the best individual stars, they don't know how to work well together, they're going to fail. So that kind of focus on measuring how, I think could also be a way to look at this going forward.
Awesome. Okay, great. Well, look, we need to wrap up, but it's been really there's such good discussion and debate. There's so much in this, so might take a couple of watch throughs to remember all of this. In less than 20 words, and Kate, you just mentioned like the potential recession that's sort of looming. What advice would you give to leaders, especially around obviously hybrid working and the landscape we have ahead of us. So yeah, fire away.
Less than 20 words.
Yeah, you can have a bit more.
Of the recession, less than 20 words. Okay, my advice is focus on what's going on inside rather than what's going on outside. You know, if you can get your people to their best and your organization working, the rest doesn't matter.
Amazing, great, thank you.
I apologize.
That's awesome. John, you're up next.
Yeah, look, I would extend on that and say that don't aim or expect perfection. You know, this isn't maths. There's no one answer, and it will be forever moving. But I just add one other thing, which is within 20 words. So I mentioned like last year's word for me was purpose. Without a doubt, that really kind of emerged a lot with the companies I spoke to. The year before that was probably a close race between unprecedented and pivot. So they were kind of neck and neck in 2020. Now, I know it's only August, but I'm going to call it already. The word for this year is rhythm. So I think hybrid work is about finding your rhythm. And remember, Apple are only piloting their hybrid work model now. So look, you're not behind.
Brilliant, thank you. Danny?
I guess like basically just totally riffing on what Kate said, like design your organization as carefully as you would your product, like and it won't be perfect, and it will evolve in the same way you build products like that, build your organization like that, but pay that attention to it, which means people and the systems that allow those people to do stuff. So yeah, that's it really.
Great stuff, thanks Danny. And Alison?
Yeah, and to sort of underline all of what everyone said, it's like give yourself and your teams permission and space to have these conversations. Really, you know, understand how important it is to be intentional about this, and it is needed and okay to have conversations about this and know that you need to develop new skills and a mindset for this way of working as well.
Brilliant. All right. Well, thank you. So there you have it. So I suppose some key takeaways is it's going to take a shift in how we manage our teams and the trust we place in our workers to get hybrid to work. You know, having a growth mindset is like absolutely key to this, and communicate. I love like making coming into the office a magnet, not a mandate. So really like that really resonated. I share ways of getting in touch with the panelists in the notes. And yeah, our next Wise Wednesday next month will be on success through systems. So tune in. If you've got any sort of questions or anything, you know, please like put them in the comments below, and we'll answer them, even these guys or myself. And look, thank you so much for joining. Thank you so much to the panelists. And I hope everyone feels slightly wiser this Wednesday as a result of joining us. So thank you.
Cheers, mate.
Thank you.